Welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks on Instagram TV. Subscribe and follow Sergeant Dorsey Speaks on my YouTube channel as well as my podcast, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. I just wanted to come to you today and just share a little something with you. Can we just talk? I have folks ask me all the time, why don't the good cops tell on the bad cops? Because if the good cops don't tell on the bad cops, then they're a bad cop too. So here's what I know, having been a 20-year veteran sergeant on the Los Angeles Police Department, having spent all 20 years in uniform, in patrol. I bring my experiences as a black woman, as a police supervisor to you to share with you a little bit of insight, to expose a little bit of that police culture and step in front of that thin blue line and just talk to you in a real honest and candid way about things that, I think are true. And so here's what I know about, good police officers. And listen, there are way more good police officers than there are bad police officers. We just hear about the bad because, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. They take all the oxygen out of the room. And there are plenty good police officers who not only report misconduct and are retaliated against when they do. There are also, officers who refuse to engage in misbehavior and misconduct and get engaged in unnecessarily uses of deadly force. And so I want to share a story with you about a young man, a white officer by the name of Stephen Mater, who did just that back in 2016. He was a Weirton PD officer, and Weirton is in West Virginia, for those of you who don't know. In 2016, then officer Stephen Mater responded to a call of a suicidal man who had been waving around a handgun. And what we now know about Stephen Mater is that he had been trained, I believe, over in Iraq in negotiations and de-escalation techniques. And he recognized right away when he responded to this radio call that this young man, R.J. Williams, was actually really trying to commit what we refer to as suicide by cop. He was waving around a handgun and just begging, shoot me, shoot me. And Stephen Mater wouldn't. He wouldn't. And he had spent a pretty substantial amount of time talking to RJ and trying to calm him down and de-escalate, because he was really, really good at de-escalation. But don't you know, some other officers showed up. You know the ones. Billy Badass showed up. And listen, who knows better what's going on than the guy that's been there from the very beginning, Stephen Mater. So then you have these other officers that show up, and this one in particular, he jumps up, and what does he do? Shoots and kills RJ. And it doesn't end there, because after this officer shot and killed RJ, there's video that I'll share with you where he testifies in court about how he thought Stephen Mater, was a coward, and he didn't, shoot soon enough. He should have shot right away. And that was his issue and his angst. You'll also hear from the police chief during that court trial with regards to his refusal to acknowledge and admit after the fact, because I say all the time, police chiefs understand, civil liability, and they understand that, what they say holds great weight, and will never admit publicly anything that is going to be detrimental to that entity, to that organism, to that organization. And you'll see the police chief do just that in the clip that I'm going to share with you. Let's take a look.
Danger because you sat there. You did. It doesn't matter what the seconds have to do with a guy leaving you and walking, advancing towards me and Baker. You did. That's why I say you're a coward, because you did nothing.
Either way, if I were to shot that kid, I wouldn't have felt justified.
Well, then that's on your own fault. You didn't feel justified in trying to protect me and Baker with a guy walking towards us with a gun?
That had he yelled out, "He's a suicide by cop," you would have acted differently.
No, I still would have acted the same way.
Then now that we have all of the facts about the incident, it turns out that Mater did correctly deduce the facts and circumstances surrounding him, correct?
I don't know.
After reading the depositions, you know, I just, in my mind, it proved that to me I was right. You know, I wasn't in the wrong, and that you know, I definitely didn't deserve to be terminated.
I think a jury would have understood that an injustice was committed, and that having found that would have afforded a remedy. Something that never should have happened. No police officer should ever be in a situation where he has to decide in making the judgment about using deadly force whether his employment would be jeopardized.
When they fired Stephen for not shooting Williams, what they really did was send a message to all the officers in Weirton and to really every police officer across the country that when in doubt, shoot. And that's not what we want to be telling officers.
So the only real bone of contention that you have with Mr. Mader is that he did not use deadly force at the first instant that you believed it should have been used, correct?
Correct.
One of the things that was significant to me in Kuzma's deposition is that he admitted that he did not use force when he believed it was required, and testified that he didn't use it because he had never been confronted with somebody pointing a gun at him. Do you agree with me that, based upon your statement of when deadly force can be used, that what you observed in that instance was an instance where you should have used deadly force?
Yes.
Okay. And we can agree that in that particular instance, however much time elapsed in what you've described here, you didn't use deadly force even though it should have been used?
Yes.
Okay. And one of the reasons that you didn't use deadly force instantaneously is because that was the first time in your entire career that you had ever been confronted with that situation. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, correct, yes.
In comparison, Stephen had concluded, I'm not going to shoot this man because I don't think it's warranted.
It's an incident that you have to look at from two perspectives. For me, it was a man with a suicidal man with a gun. For the other officers, it was a man who was waving a gun around.
I agree with, as fast as everything progressed, you know, I was faced with a situation where a guy has a gun and he's waving it back and forth, pointing it at me, that I had to react, and there was no reaction out of Mr. Mader.
In the end,
Yeah, I mean,
my decision was my decision.
If Mader didn't believe that R.J. Williams posed an immediate threat of harm to himself or others, he would not have been permitted to shoot him under either the Constitution or Weirton's use of force policy.
Objection to
Is that correct?
yes.
RJ's sister actually reached out to me on Facebook and was basically, in short, it was all very kind words, but basically saying that, you know, she was happy that I was the officer who had confronted him first, and that, you know, the last moments in his life that I was the one speaking to him.
So this is young RJ, 23 years old, had his whole life ahead of him, and just, you know, was going through something. And Stephen Mader, you know, he had that rare quality, empathy, compassion, relatability that we don't always see officers displaying. He recognized that this young man didn't really want to die. He was just begging, if you will, for some sort of assistance. And Stephen Mader was there to give it to him until, you know, Billy Badass rolled up to provide backup and kill this kid. So that's what happens when good officers speak up. That's what happens when good officers do as they're trained and taught and don't use deadly force as a first resort. They use it as a last resort after everything else has been tried and failed. That's what Stephen Mater was doing. He was trying to de-escalate. And listen, he's not the only one. There are plenty of examples of officers like Stephen Mater, some who I've come to know. There's a detective by the name of Joe Crystal from the Baltimore Police Department who was run out on a rail because he was a good officer. There's a detective by the name of, I believe it was Sean Suter, who also was on the Baltimore Police Department, was about to testify, a good cop about to testify against some bad cops, and we don't know what happened. They say he committed suicide the day before he was supposed to testify in court against the bad officers. There's a female over Fmr Houston Police Department officer, my sister in law enforcement, who I was standing in solidarity with just a few days ago in Houston, Kathy Swilley, good police officer, spoke up, told on the bad police officers, and what did she get for her troubles? She too was run out on a rail, fabricated, allegedly, according to her, information to get her off the department. Another female who I've come to know, Carriole Holloman Horn, former Buffalo Police Department officer, nearly at 20 years when she reported a partner, Greg Kayakowski, who had hit a handcuffed suspect. And when she reported it, well, first she tried to stop him as he was beating this handcuffed suspect, and he hit her in the face and broke her nose. And then when word got out to the rest of the troops, they ran her out on a rail, and she has been fighting mightily since that time, and I think it was like 2008, trying to get her pension restored because she was denied her pension when she was fired. So listen, there's a price to pay for police officers who speak out, particularly when you know that you don't have the support of your immediate supervisors, you don't have the support of command staff, and ultimately your police chief. That's why it's so hard for police officers to speak up, because you don't want to run the risk of not being able to take care of your own family because you're trying to do the right thing, and the powers that be don't seem to want you to do the right thing. And so for those who say, why don't the good police officers speak up? I say, ask that of a police chief the next time you have an opportunity to talk to one. Ask a police chief to create a safe zone, because while there's whistleblower protection, and listen, you guys watch the news, you see what's going on in this current administration with a whistleblower. There's a term, there's supposedly protections, but for real, there's no such thing as whistleblower protection. And that's why the good police officers are sometimes reluctant to come forward, because they see what happens to the Joe Crystals, Kathy Swilley, Carriole Holloman Horn, and Detective Sean Suter, who allegedly committed suicide. I mention these names because, as with everything that I say to you, I don't want you to just take my word for it. Google them, research them, do your own due diligence, and know that what I'm saying is real, but know it for yourself. I say this because, again, I want to enlighten you and empower you, give you the verbiage so that you can ask those tough questions if you have an opportunity to attend a community meeting with a police chief, to ask a sheriff or a police commissioner, what are you doing about creating safe zones so that the good cops can come forward and speak on the bad cops? Well, that's it for now, family. That's it for this edition of Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. Be sure to support my mission at my CashApp, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, or on Venmo, or visit my website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com, where you can purchase my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. I'll send you a personally signed copy. Until next time, family, be good and be safe.